Today, I will tell you two true stories about the pit stop terror horror story that happened in California, which will scare you. So, without further ado, let's get started.
It was supposed to be a straightforward drive to my friend's cabin, a remote getaway nestled in the forest. Amy and I had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to escape the chaos of city life. The highway stretched endlessly in front of us, flanked by dense woods on either side. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, we were both starving and needed a bathroom break. The flashing neon sign of a roadside diner was a welcome sight. "The Last Stop Diner," read the sign, flickering ominously in the dark. The parking lot was nearly empty except for an old pickup truck. We pulled in, and as soon as we stepped inside, we felt the change in atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of stale grease, and a single man sat at the counter, hunched over a cup of coffee. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with deep circles under her eyes, greeted us with a weary smile. Amy and I slid into a booth near the window. The menu was sticky, and the lighting flickered intermittently. Despite the odd vibe, we ordered burgers and tried to laugh off our unease. The man at the counter, however, kept glancing our way. His pale blue eyes were unsettling, and his cracked lips moved as if he were whispering to himself. Amy noticed too. "He's weird," she whispered. "Let's eat quickly and go." The waitress brought our food and leaned in slightly. "You girls driving far?" she asked, her voice low. Before we could answer, the man's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood up. He tossed a crumpled bill onto the counter and shuffled out, casting one last glance at our table before disappearing into the night. "That was creepy," Amy said, watching him through the window. His truck didn't start. Instead, he just sat inside, unmoving. We tried to ignore it and finished eating quickly. As we left the diner, I felt a chill run down my spine. The man's truck was still there, his silhouette barely visible behind the wheel. We hurried to the car, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot. About 10 minutes down the road, our car's check engine light came on. "Great timing," I muttered. We pulled over to the shoulder, and I popped the hood to take a look. Amy stayed inside, scrolling through her phone for a signal. The night was eerily silent except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel behind me. I froze, my heart pounding. Slowly, I turned, and there he was, the man from the diner, standing just a few feet away. His pale blue eyes glinted in the moonlight, and he wore an unsettling grin. "Need help?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "No, we're fine," I stammered, backing toward the car. Amy saw him through the windshield and quickly locked the doors. "Car trouble," he persisted, taking a step closer. "It's fine, thanks," I said firmly, climbing back into the driver's seat. He stood there for a moment, staring at us, before turning and walking back toward his truck, which was parked further down the road. We waited until he was out of sight, then started the car again. Miraculously, it turned over without an issue. "That was too weird," Amy said, her voice shaky. We drove in silence, the tension in the car palpable. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw headlights. A truck. "Is that him?" Amy asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep calm. The truck stayed behind us, matching our speed. When I sped up, so did it. When I slowed down, it did the same. Panic set in. "He's following us," Amy whispered. I took a sharp turn down a dirt road, hoping to lose him. The truck followed. "What do we do?" Amy asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Just hold on," I said, gripping the wheel tightly. I sped down the uneven road, the car bouncing over potholes. The truck's headlights loomed closer and closer. Suddenly, the road ended in a clearing. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. The truck pulled in behind us, blocking the exit. The man stepped out, holding something in his hand. It glinted in the moonlight. "Stay in the car," I told Amy, my voice shaking. He approached slowly, his grin wider than ever. "Told you I'd help," he said, raising the object in his hand. It was a wrench. Before he could get any closer, the sound of a distant engine roared. Another set of headlights appeared, speeding toward us. The man froze, then quickly retreated to his truck. He drove off, disappearing into the night. The approaching vehicle turned out to be a local ranger on patrol. We explained what had happened, and he escorted us to a nearby motel, ensuring we were safe for the night. We never saw the man again, but I still can't shake the feeling of his eyes watching us that night. It was past midnight, and the road stretched endlessly before us, illuminated only by the dim glow of the headlights. My best friend Claire and I were returning from a music festival, exhausted but exhilarated, ready to collapse in our beds after hours of singing and dancing. The highway was desolate, with not a single car in sight, and our fuel gauge was hovering dangerously close to empty. "Look, there's a gas station up ahead," Claire said, pointing to a flickering neon sign that read, "Midnight Fuel, open 24/7. It was the only sign of civilization we'd seen in miles. The station was old and worn, with a single rusty pump and a small convenience store. As we pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch of the tires echoed in the eerie silence. The place looked abandoned, save for a dim light glowing from the store window. Claire stayed in the car while I got out to refuel. The air was unnaturally still, and the night seemed heavier somehow. As I started pumping gas, I noticed an old man sitting behind the counter inside the store. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his piercing eyes seemed to follow my every move. Feeling a bit uneasy, I finished pumping and walked into the store to pay. The bell above the door jingled, and the old man didn't even flinch. The shelves were sparsely stocked, and a faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. "Late night for you too," he said in a gravelly voice, his lips curling into a crooked smile. "Yeah, long drive," I replied, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. As he rang me up, he leaned in slightly. "Be careful on these roads. Strange things happen out here after midnight." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced a polite smile and nodded. When I returned to the car, Claire looked at me with a puzzled expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing, let's just get going," I said, brushing off the unease. We pulled out of the station and back onto the highway, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. A few miles down the road, Claire suddenly tensed. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of headlights in the distance, steadily gaining on us. "It's probably just another driver," I said, trying to sound confident. But as the car drew closer, I realized something was off. The headlights flickered erratically, and the car swerved slightly, as if the driver was struggling to control it. Should we pull over and let them pass? Claire asked nervously. Before I could respond, the car behind us began flashing its high beams repeatedly, blinding us momentarily. It then veered into the other lane and sped past us. For a brief moment, we caught a glimpse of the driver, or what should have been the driver. The car was empty. What the hell? Claire gasped, gripping the edge of her seat. The car swerved back into our lane and slowed down, forcing us to hit the brakes. It then sped up again, disappearing into the darkness. Did you see that? Claire exclaimed, her voice trembling. I don't know what I saw, I admitted, my hands shaking on the wheel. We drove in silence for several minutes, our nerves on edge, until we saw the same car parked on the side of the road ahead. Its headlights were off, but the faint outline of the vehicle was unmistakable. Keep driving, Claire urged, her voice quivering. I pressed down on the accelerator, determined to put as much distance as possible between us and that car. But as we rounded the next bend, the headlights appeared behind us again, this time much closer. It's following us, Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. The car began flashing its high beams again, and a faint sound, like a distorted voice, emanated from somewhere, though it was impossible to tell if it was coming from the car behind us or the surrounding darkness. Suddenly, the road forked, and without thinking, I veered onto the smaller, less traveled path. The car behind us hesitated for a moment before disappearing altogether. Relieved but still terrified, we continued down the narrow road. It was overgrown with trees, their gnarled branches forming a tunnel that blocked out the moonlight. Just as we began to relax, the car sputtered and came to a stop. No, 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 I muttered, frantically turning the key in the ignition. Do you hear that? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A faint tapping sound came from outside, growing louder and more insistent. Don't look, I said, gripping her arm. But it was too late. Claire turned her head toward the passenger side window and screamed. A pale face with hollow eyes was pressed against the glass, its mouth moving soundlessly. I grabbed Claire's hand, and we bolted out of the car, running blindly through the forest. The tapping sound followed us, now accompanied by guttural whispers that seemed to come from every direction. We finally stumbled upon an old cabin, its door hanging loosely on its hinges. Desperate for shelter, we ran inside and barricaded the door with a heavy wooden beam. The whispers grew louder, circling the cabin like a swarm of insects. Through the cracks in the walls, we saw faint figures moving outside, their faces eerily similar to the one we had seen at the window. Just when we thought we couldn't bear it any longer, the first light of dawn broke through the trees. The whispers faded, and the figures disappeared as if they had never been there. Shaking, we stepped out of the cabin and made our way back to the road. Our car was gone, and so was the other vehicle. We walked until a passing truck picked us up and drove us to safety. When we told the driver what had happened, he shook his head solemnly. That road's been abandoned for years, he said. Folks say it's haunted by the spirits of those who died in car accidents out there. You're lucky you made it out. Claire and I never spoke of that night again, but every time I drive alone at night, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those flickering headlights once more.